Good evening and welcome to the District 196 Board of Education meeting. Tonight is Monday, December 12th, and this is our regularly scheduled board meeting. Would you rise as we join in the Pledge of Allegiance as we call the meeting to order? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This evening, I'm going to ask you to remain standing as we observe a moment of silence. A moment of silence for Mia Volk, a 10th grade student at Eastview High School who passed away recently. Our thoughts are with her family and her 196 family. Thank you. Board, as we look at the agenda this evening, we are working from a revised agenda tonight. Pay rates for substitute, temporary, and part-time community education employees have been added to the consent agenda. So I will look for an approval of the amended agenda.
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Sachin and a second by Bianca. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. That passes on a 5-0 vote. Sakowden and Art are not able to be with us this evening, so we will work with a 5-0 board, which works fine. Tonight, we have recognition by the school board, and this is our favorite part, is recognizing our students and staff and the tremendous things that they do. But tonight, our favorite team, we would like to welcome head coach Lori Buckler and introduce the Dakota United Hawks Adapted Soccer PI State Champions. And we should have all worn our Dakota Hawks t-shirts because we've got them, because we've been your fans. So we can't wait to meet you all.
Good evening, Chairperson Magnuson, school board members, and Superintendent Krieger. Thank you for inviting us this evening. My name is Lori Bexler, and I am the head coach of the 2022 Minnesota PI Adapted Soccer State Champions, the Dakota United Hawks. Before I introduce my team, I'd love to introduce my assistant coaches, Steve Eggleston, Jacob Moss, Paul Stokey. My assistant coaches are the absolute best, whether they're instructing players or giving me advice when I second guess myself, or simply making practices a lot more fun. They are the best, and I'm blessed to call them my friends. And in the blessings category, I need to also include the most helpful and supportive AD that a team could ask for, Eastview's Matt Percival.
Woohoo!
And now for our team, beginning with our captains. Egan High School seniors, now I told everyone to wave when I said their name, but Fiona's holding the trophy, so don't wave, okay? Seniors, Fiona Sitzman and Rohan Deshpande. Who, along with sophomore Reese Martin from Rosemount High School, were named the all-tournament team. And the rest of our team, not with us tonight, Jordan Johnson, who's a senior at Eastview. But with us tonight, we do have some more Egan High School athletes. We're really Egan heavy this time. Freshman Chloe Shabata. Sophomores Livia Grossbauer and Caden Needham. Rosemount Junior Amisha Eder. In Rosemount Middle School, 7th grader Bennett Herman. Also on our team was Dominic Albus. He was a junior at Egan and was injured this season, not playing soccer, but was sometimes able to be part of the team from the sidelines. Our record this year was 5-0-1. We had a bye for the first round of state. Then we beat Rochester for the third time, I think, this season, in the semifinals. Then we won the championship game against the usual team from the north with a final score of 4-3. But the best part of the story that you may not know is that even though we scored first in that final game, we found ourselves looking at a 3-1 deficit with just minutes left in the final game. But just as we knew she could, and she's holding the trophy, Fiona Sitzman scored again, and then again, and then again. Our opponents couldn't stop her. The rest of our team fed her the ball, blocked the shots on our goal, and supported one of the best final moments of any game that I have coached. It was a perfect ending for our seniors and also a perfect ending for all of us. Thank you for having us this evening.
Thank you so much, Coach. Congratulations, thank you, good job. Thank you, Coach. Fiona, great job. Thank you for coming tonight. Congratulations, you inspire everybody else. Congratulations. Congratulations. Our favorite team, the Dakota Hawks. Tonight, we'll turn it back. Next on the agenda is the superintendent's recognition of students and staff.
Thank you. More good news in the sports realm. Congratulations to the Rosemont High School football team on finishing runner-up in the Class 6A state tournament earlier this month. Although it did not end as we hoped, the team still had a very memorable and wonderful season. And this is the last regular school board meeting before winter break, so I want to give another shout out to the members of the Rosemont High School Marching Band, who will be performing in the Tournament of Roses Parade in Pasadena, California on January 2nd, 2023. This will be Rosemont's second time performing in the Rose Parade. The first was in 2014. Rosemont is one of only 6 high school bands selected to perform in the 134th Rose Parade, which draws about 700,000 spectators in person and is viewed by more than 300 million people in more than 200 countries. We will all be watching with great pride that day for the hard work they've put in to get there and the pride that they will give us upon performing. Congratulations, Rosemont High School Marching Band staff, students, and families. And lastly, I want to congratulate all the students and staff who have been and will be giving performances in band, choir, and on stage for winter concerts and plays. I saw Encore at Egan High School over the weekend, and it was wonderful, and I'm looking forward to seeing Susical at Eastview next weekend. It takes hours and hours of practice and rehearsal to achieve the incredibly high-level performances that we enjoy in our District 196 schools, and I congratulate all of our performing arts students and staff for your outstanding work. Thank you.
Hear, hear. It's always hard to imagine that you're watching high school kids because they are so phenomenal. So congratulations. Next on the agenda is the consent agenda. The items under the consent agenda this evening are the minutes of the November 14th, 2022 special school board meeting, the minutes of the November 14th, 2022 regular school board meeting, gifts, quarterly advertising revenue, grants, Treasurer's report for October 2022, a summary of claims for October 2022, schedule of investments for October 2022, revenue and expenditure report for October 2022, rescind the donation from the Virtual Aviation of Minnesota, appointments to the Budget Advisory Council, personnel, an employee agreement, agreements for student teaching and clinical experience, Northern College and College of St. Scholastica, pay rates for substitute, temporary, and part-time employees, pay rates for substitute, temporary, and part-time community ed employees, non-public school counseling services agreements, amend to the lease agreement between Minnesota Zoological Board and District 196, and the designation of combined precincts and polling places for 2023. Seeing that, is there any items on the consent agenda board members would like to pull tonight? If not, I'll entertain a motion in a second.
So moved?
Second?
We have a motion by Corey, a second by Bianca. Any other questions? Seeing none, all in favor of the consent agenda indicate by saying aye. 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 Opposed? Thank you. That passes on a 5-0 vote. Next up this evening is our 2022-23 Truth and Taxation hearing. We'll hand it over to Mark Stotts, and at this time, he'll walk through our Truth and Taxation hearing. There will be opportunities at the end of this session, or of his presentation, for the public to ask questions.
Chair Magnuson, Superintendent Krieger, members of the board. This is the annual Truth and Taxation hearing, and I hope Cliff has me set up here. Oh yeah, it's on the screen. So we're in good shape here. Minnesota state law requires that we hold a public hearing between November 25th and December 28th. Here we are this evening on December 12th. The meeting must be at 6 o'clock or later, and we're in good shape there. It's part of the regular scheduled board meeting tonight. And then, as Chair Magnuson stated, we have to allow for public comments, and then we'll request later this evening your approval of the final levy for taxes payable in 2023. We also are going to talk about the current year budget and proposed property taxes. So I'll go through a little bit of background here on information on school funding. We'll talk about the district's budget, and then the proposed tax levy for taxes payable in 2023, and then allow for public comment. So this is just a reminder that public education is really the responsibility of the states. And in the Minnesota Constitution, there is a statement on a uniform system of public schools. So I just wanted to remind people of that as we go through this presentation. Funding for school districts, as we all know, is very heavily regulated. The state sets the formulas which determine the revenues in the school districts. It sets tax policy for local school districts, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the property tax portion. And then they set the maximum authority that the board has to levy for property taxes. Anything beyond that has to go to the public in the form of a referendum. So typically we are familiar with operating levy referendums and capital referendums for building projects. Okay, so the basic general education formula has lagged inflation. We've talked about this in previous years. You can see in 21-22, the year we just finished up, all school districts in the state received a 2.45% increase over the previous year. This year, the increase is 2%, and we all know what inflation is doing. So 2% isn't getting us very far in terms of anticipated costs. The per pupil allowance in 22-23 is $6,863, and it would have to increase by another $1,263 in order to keep up with inflation since 2002-2003. So you can see we've really lagged in funding on a per pupil basis as it relates to inflation. And this is just a graphical representation of that. And we talk about the special education cross subsidy, and that is the difference between what we receive in revenue to fund special education programs and the amount we actually expend on special education programs. As I typically state in these types of meetings, nobody argues with the need for special education programs and the services that we provide our students. What we do, I guess, argue about is if we're going to have mandates, then we need to be funded for those mandates. And that's an area where the federal government in particular has fell woefully short. Last year, 21-22 school year, our district's cross subsidy was approximately $32 million. So that's $32 million that comes directly out of the general fund to cover additional special education costs. Okay, one thing I think people sometimes don't understand is school boards don't have discretionary levy authority like county governments and city governments. And so when we see an increase in our tax levy, it doesn't necessarily equate to an increase in revenue for the district. Many times the legislature will increase the property tax levy on a particular item, but they'll reduce the state aid portion that the school districts receive. So a lot of times, even though we see an increase in the levy, it's really revenue neutral, or we actually go down in revenues. So our levy cycle, our budget year runs from July 1st to June 30th every year, and the taxes that we're talking about tonight are payable in 2023. That is revenue for the 23-24 fiscal year. So as I've stated in previous meetings, right now we're actually only working in 2 years right now, the current year budget, and then this is the first step in the 23-24 budget. We just finished up the audit, so there are times during the year when we're actually working on 3 different fiscal years all at the same time. Okay, many of you are really familiar with how school district budgets work and what they look like. There's various funds within school districts. The general fund is our main operating fund that pays for salaries, benefits, utilities, and so forth. Then we have the food service fund and the community service fund. The building construction fund, which this year we are down to 0 after the 2015 referendum. Then we have our debt service fund, which goes towards paying the principal and interest payments on our debt. And then we have the internal services fund for our self-funded health and dental insurance programs. And then we have OPEB trust and the OPEB debt service. So here is a snapshot, and I know there's a lot of numbers on this page and it's a small font. This is actually what we were required to publish prior to November 30th. And so these numbers represent the initial budget that the board approved back in June. You had to approve a budget prior to June 30th. Tonight, a little later on tonight, Christopher will be presenting the final budget. So those numbers will look different than this. Anyway, you can see in the general fund, we are projecting a decrease in our reserves from last year. We're still in good financial health. But I'd like to say that we're experiencing somewhat of a post-pandemic hangover in that we received a lot of one-time funds during the pandemic. We've implemented programs that have been a big benefit to students, but now that one-time funding is going away. And so at some point, we're going to have to reevaluate our costs and get our budget back into balance. But we do have plenty of reserves to cover deficit budget in the general fund for the current year. Food service budget, the fund balance is projected to grow to about $9.5 million this year. Very healthy fund balance there. As well as community service, it's about a break-even budget, slight growth in the fund balance for the current year. Like I said, the building construction fund is basically down to 0. We're showing a balance here of $296,000. We do expect that to be closer to 0 by the end of the year. And then the debt service fund, we're always required to levy 105% of our annual principal and interest payments on our debt. So that fund balance is growing a little bit. And then you can see the OPEB fund, which is at about $51 million. That's for post-employment benefits, and the OPEB debt service fund. So if you looked out at a breakdown of our revenues, obviously the biggest portion of our revenues occurs in the general fund. Our total budget is about $550 million this year. $445 million of that is in the general fund. Then you can see the food service fund at about $13 million, community service at about 9.6, and so forth. And if we look at revenues in a little different manner, you can see that in the general fund, the state provides us with about 69% of our total revenues. So we are very reliant upon the state and the state legislature. Local property taxes are at about 23.7%. That's our second largest source of funding. And then finally, you see the federal and other sources. If we look at the expenditure side, we're in the people business, and you can see from this, between salaries and wages and employee benefits, we spend about 84% of our budget on people in the form of salaries and benefits. That's a good thing. And you can see purchase services, supplies and materials, capital, and other. Looking at our expenditures in a little different manner, a majority of our expenditures go directly to the classroom in the form of regular instruction, vocational ed, special education instruction, and so forth. So we do a really good job. Our administrative costs, I know people have a tendency to focus on that. Our administrative costs are actually below what we see in other school districts as a percentage of the total budget. On the property tax levy, I'm going to talk about how do we, what are the components of the levy, the reasons for the changes, comparison to last year, and then what the impact is on individual homeowners or taxpayers. Property tax background, every owner of taxable property pays property taxes to not only the school district, but also the cities, counties, townships, watershed boards, and other taxing jurisdictions. Each jurisdiction sets their levy, and then the county actually spreads that over the taxable properties within the district. And this is just a sample of the form that I'm sure most property tax owners are familiar with. It comes out typically in November, late November, early December. It's the proposed property taxes for 2023. So for school districts, we can levy in over 40 different categories. The maximum amount of those levies is determined by state law or by voter approval. So in our case, we have an operating levy in place that was voted on by our taxpayers. And I'll go through the steps here of the levy process. The first step is that the city or county assessor determines the estimated market value for each parcel of property in the district. And as many of you maybe have seen on your own property tax statements, values have increased significantly this year. The most I've seen in 25 years of doing this. The legislature sets the formulas for tax capacities and what our school districts' levy limits are. Then the county auditor calculates the tax capacity for each parcel of property. Department of Ed sets the levy limits, and then the school board, you adopted a proposed levy at the maximum back on September 8th, and then the county auditor actually divides those levies amongst the various parcels within the district. So as I mentioned, September 8th, MDE came out with the initial draft of the levy limits. On September 26th, I think I misspoke earlier, September 26th was when the board adopted the proposed levy at the maximum. The proposed property tax statements went out in November. Tonight we're having our public hearing, and then also tonight you'll be asked to certify the final levy. So we're looking at an increase of approximately 7% for 22-23 taxes over 2022. That's about $8.7 million. And here are the details. These are the 40 different categories that I was talking about earlier. You can see in the general fund, we're proposing a levy increase of about 8.6%. Community service levy is up about 2.5%, and then the debt service levy is actually down 2% for a total of 7% increase. The biggest changes was the voter-approved operating levy that I referred to earlier. It's going up by approximately $4.2 million. Again, the biggest driver here is we have a slight increase in enrollment estimates, and operating levies are always on a per pupil basis, so we're seeing an increase there. And then probably the bigger factor is the inflationary adjustment that voters approved when they approved this levy. Long-term facilities maintenance levy is up about $2 million, and that's mainly due to additional projects that we have submitted in our 10-year plan for next year. And then prior year adjustments. If you know anything about school finance, budgets, levies are all based upon estimates. They're based on estimated student enrollments, they're based on estimated property values, and so the state is always reconciling those estimates to the actual numbers after the fact. So we have approximately $2 million in levy adjustments this year. Some of the things people may not recognize, maybe they do, some of the phone calls I get, somebody will call me up and say, well, my taxes went up X amount this year. And the first thing I tell them to look at is, can you tell me what your assessed value was last year versus next year? So anytime there's a change in the assessed value of a property, it's going to have an impact on the taxes. Changes in the total assessed value of properties within the district is also going to have an impact. And like I said, this year has been the biggest increase I've seen in a long, long time. I think it's the biggest increase I've ever seen with property values. So I've got some comparisons here, and what I'll do is focus on a $400,000 home, which is right around the average within the district. And you can see if a property was valued at or assessed at $400,000 last year and $400,000 this year, they'd actually see a decrease in their school taxes of $146. And there we have examples for commercial, industrial, and apartments and so forth. And this is just a graphical representation of that. But what I really want to show you is this one. A home's assessed value staying constant between 22 and 23, I would say is somewhat unrealistic since most properties have seen an increase. The average increase in residential properties was about 25.6%. So if you take a $400,000 home in example 2 here with an assessed value of $400,000 last year, or it would have been $347,826 last year, they would have paid $1,773 in taxes. This year the assessed value goes up to $400,000. They pay $1,904. So you can see what impact the increase in the assessed value has on property taxes that each parcel is paying. Just to let people know, there are property tax refunds and deferrals available. We don't give advice in this area. I'd recommend they talk to a tax professional if they want to explore these options. But there's the homestead credit refund that's available, special property tax refunds, and then senior citizen property tax deferrals. And again, if people would like to take advantage of these programs, they should consult with a tax professional. So the next steps is the The board has to allow for public comment tonight on the proposed levy, and then later this evening, we'll ask for approval of the final levy.
With that, we'll open up the public hearing part of the meeting, and you are more than welcome to have a question or comment. And if you have a question or comment, we'll ask you to come up to the microphone, state your name and where you live, and we'll see if we can answer it for you. Or not we, but Mark. Good evening.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Linda Garrett Johnson. I live in Apple Valley. Do you need my home address? Because I don't like to make that public.
No, that's
Okay,
fine.
I live in Apple Valley. My biggest question is just kind of the process of doing this whole, the property tax increase. So what I mean by that is, today, I learned about the increase when I got my property tax statement in the mail. What I would have liked to have known is backed up. I didn't realize that that you guys did some budgeting in September, that there was a budget put together at that time, because I'm just hearing that now. How do regular folks hear about this? Because I feel like if I really wanted to have real input, because like today, you're at the end of this process, right? I kind of feel like, I don't really feel like anything that I say is going to change anything at this point. Does that make sense? I mean, you're pretty much going to approve it. So how do we, as residents that are looking at a possible increase in our property tax, hear, based on what's happening in the school district, hear about this upstream so we're not at the end of it when you're ready to make a decision? That's my question.
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. So I would say a couple different ways that somebody could keep informed about this is, number one, school districts are always required to adopt a proposed levy in September. And that is pretty well publicized. I think obviously it's done during a regular school board meeting. That is posted. And we don't have a formal hearing. But at the same time, it happens every year during September. And then between September and November, the proposed property tax statements come out, and it tells people, like you probably saw in your statement, that we were having a public hearing this evening. But in that interim, if they have questions, they can give me a call, or you can call a school board member. And that's really the best way for, a citizen to stay informed and get their concerns heard, is to contact board members or administration. Corey?
I just wanted to add something on top of what you said, and I'm pretty sure later on tonight, my board docs isn't working, but if memory serves, Christopher's presenting on our budget book also. That's another fantastic resource for any community member to look at. They put it out every year, correct? The district puts it out every year. Talks about all our funds, the timeline. It breaks it down from a very high level of where the funds come from. It breaks it down all the way into each different funding source. So that's another fantastic resource I always give to any member of the community who's looking for more information on our budget process.
And those documents are on our website and accessible for people to look up, so.
And I think this isn't direct, but talk maybe a little bit about, we do have a budget advisory committee,
Right.
council.
So we've got a budget advisory committee. I can't remember how many people are on that, but it's got to be at least 20 community members who advise the school board on financially related matters. But it's a good way if people are interested in participating in that. There's an application process that occurs every year, and it's really a good way both to provide input, but also to stay informed about district finances in general, so.
Perfect. Are there any other questions or comments? As always, board members are open to questions and comments. Mark Stotts is open to questions and comments. So if you have more, if you think of more, you can certainly direct them to any of us. So thank you. We'll close the truth and taxation hearing tonight, and there's nothing that we're going to act upon here. That comes down later in the meeting when Christopher's up here. Right, Mark?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was trying to figure out the,
He was going to his next one, because next on the agenda this evening is enrollment projections for 2023-24, and Mark Stotz is going to walk us through the enrollment projections.
okay, so we've already presented to the board this school year the October 1st enrollments. What we're looking at now is our enrollment projections for next school year, 23-24. I'm having a hard time getting used to that already. It's
Yeah,
going to be
right.
23-24. And the reason we bring these to the board every year is we would like to inform the board of what we're thinking administratively, what we're seeing in terms of future enrollments. And these enrollment projections are used for figuring out staffing allocations in the buildings for budgeting purposes next year, as well as other budgetary allocations to the buildings. So they are really important, and I think it's an opportunity, just like I said, for the board to see the trends and so forth that we're seeing as administration. So I'll take you way back. You know, Hazel did the study prior to the pandemic. She actually updated that study in 2020. We have seen a rebound of our enrollments since the pandemic decrease. We're still not up to pre-pandemic levels. We're slightly below, and I'll show you that number later here in a second. But then we also look at the births by the county and the district to try and project those incoming kindergarten enrollments. So we have an enrollment projection committee because I think it's really important to get principal and other district office people involved in this so there's buy-in when it comes to the budgeting process. So on this committee, we have 4 principals representing elementary, secondary. We go through key assumptions. We review the results from the enrollment projection model that we use, and then we make a recommendation to cabinet. So what we're projecting for next October is a slight decrease in elementary enrollments. We were very conservative on our kindergarten enrollment projections. We're projecting about 1,800 regular kindergarten and then another 88 in center-based kindergarten programs. At the middle school, we're seeing an increase, just a slight increase over this year. And at the high school, we're showing an increase of 87 students over this year. So if we look at that in totality and include some of our non-traditional programs like the SES, the ALC, and Adult Basic Ed, and special education, we are projecting a total student enrollment of 29,107 students next October. That's a 60 student increase over the current year. So again, the district enrollments are still projected to increase, but they're not increasing at as fast a rate as what we anticipated prior to the pandemic. You can see enrollments peaked back in the 2019-20 school year at 29,223. So we're almost getting up to that level again, but we're not quite there for next year. And again, this is not new to anybody, but most of our new growth is occurring in the southeast portion of the school district. So just summary, total enrollment projections for next October are 29,107, just slight increase of 60 students, and we expect the growth to continue. How quickly we're going to grow, I guess, remains to be seen. We're still feeling the effects of the pandemic, and I guess time will tell before we see how fast our enrollments actually increase. So with that, I'd entertain any questions you might have.
Perfect. Before I go to the board, I'll ask if there are any questions or comments from the audience. Seeing none, board members, questions or comments? we keep watching the enrollment because we want to make sure we have space for all the students that are here. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda under reports this evening is the shareholders' input on the facilities recommendations. Tony Tashner is going to walk us through what they have collected.
All right, Chairperson Magnuson, board members, and Superintendent Krieger. I'm here tonight as a member of the Facilities and Equipment Steering Committee to give a brief overview of the main themes of input we received from District 196 stakeholders reacting to the preliminary recommendations for new facilities master plan, which were presented at your November 14th regular meeting. Those recommendations, as you know, were developed by the District Facilities and Equipment Steering Committee over the last year and a half. Those recommendations are for phase one improvements that are designed to address needs identified by the committee in the areas of planning for growth, providing a consistent experience for students across the district, and maintaining updated facilities and equipment for safety, security, and supervision. If you recall, in September, we hired Morris Leatherman Polling Company to conduct a scientific survey of our community to get quantitative data on our stakeholders' awareness of facilities needs in the district, whether they supported the committee's proposed improvements, and at what level of tax impact. The quantitative results of the community survey show that there was support for bringing a bond referendum and for the individual improvements being proposed at a level of approximately $10 per month on the average value home. The themes I'm going to talk about tonight represent the qualitative data that we've gathered from District 196 stakeholders since the preliminary recommendations were presented to the board on November 14th. I will note that the picture is not of a line of people trying to get into the district dialogue meetings. That is a crowded hallway at Rosemount Middle School. So we did, that same week as the recommendations were presented to the board, the administration, assisted by members of our district advisory councils, conducted 3 district dialogues on facilities in 3 consecutive nights at high schools in the 3 largest cities in our district. Information promoting the district dialogues was shared with stakeholders via the media, on district and school websites, social media, and in translated emails from schools to families. Interpreter services were also offered all 3 nights. We ended up with a total of 169 participants combined at these 3 meetings. The district dialogues started out with an overview presentation of the preliminary recommendations by Superintendent Krieger and Director of Finance and Operations, Mark Stotts, same as they presented them to the school board earlier that week. After the presentation, participants were divided into small groups and asked to respond to several prompts, including their perception of district facilities currently, awareness of needs, their thoughts about the preliminary recommendations, and support for calling a bond referendum question. The small groups were facilitated by members of our district advisory councils, and input was summarized by administrators who served as recorders. We also got a lot of good information and insight from debrief meetings with facilitators and recorders that were held immediately after each night's meeting. As mentioned above, we also had an online input form available from November 15th through December 7th. Online commenters could view the presentation video and slides if they chose, and then share input on the preliminary recommendations. We received nearly 1,600 responses online during these 3 weeks. As with most anything, of course, there was a range of opinions, but as we will see in the next 3 slides, there was a high level of support for the recommendations and moving forward with a bond referendum. In the online form, in addition to inviting people to share their input in an open response format, we also asked 2 yes and no questions regarding support for the recommendations and an amount. We had more than 1,500 responses to each question. The first was, would you support the recommendations outlined in the presentation for the district's facility needs for the next 10 years. 82% of respondents at the district dialogue said yes, or I'm sorry, in online said yes, compared to 18% no. So that's about 1,250 yes to about 275 no. Another question in the online form asked, would you support an increase of $10 per month on the average value home in the district? Now that amount was selected based on the amount that it showed from the community survey, which was, I guess from the survey, was a comfortable amount, the $10 amount a month on the average value home. Here, the results were very similar, with 83% responding yes compared to 17% no. So from the responses to those two questions, you can see that there was majority of people commenting online were supportive of the proposal. So looking at the input that we received online and in the district dialogues, overall support for the recommendations as a whole was very high, with 18 of the 20 small groups of dialogue participants indicating that as a group, they support the plan, and as well supportive comments online. In addition, 4 of the groups indicated that a higher amount than $10 per month on the average value home would be acceptable for them in order to address items not in phase 1 of the recommendations. We heard from people saying that they want more information. We heard from people saying they want more information, and that's normal in this process. If the board does decide to move forward, we will provide additional information in an information campaign. There were also comments, suggestions, and questions that show us that there are opportunities to inform and educate if we move forward with the bond referendum. And here's the bullet that I was wanting to talk about. Not surprisingly, we heard strong support both in the dialogue meetings and in the online comments for improving or maintaining and improving safety and security at our schools. There was support for the additional cameras and improved outdoor lighting that are included in the recommendations, and we heard a number of concerns at the dialogues about supervision and privacy related to bathrooms, which is also a component of the safety, security, and supervision improvements that are being recommended. Growth is one of the 3 areas, needs areas addressed in the recommendations, and there seemed to be general agreement that schools are crowded, some more than others, and that more space is needed to keep pace with projected growth in the southeast area of the district. The schools mentioned most often in the dialogue meetings and in online input included Rosemount Elementary, Rosemount Middle, Rosemount High, and Scott Highlands Middle. There were comments with concerns about crowding in classrooms, bathrooms, hallways, lunchrooms, gyms, and other athletic facilities. In the area of providing a consistent experience across the district, some participants expressed concerns about older buildings in the district not being renovated to be comparable to newer buildings like an Eastlake Elementary School, for example. Students in overcrowded schools are not getting the same experience as other students, one dialogue participant commented, referring to Rosemount Middle School. There were also concerns about center-based special education space, regular classrooms being used as science labs in middle schools, and not wanting any one of the high schools to get too large compared to the others. There was some concern about the number of big projects in Rosemount, and wondered about what the recommendations would provide to schools in other areas of the district. We have received this question in the superintendent's office since the dialogue meetings as well, including one from an Apple Valley resident. In a response, we reminded them of the improvements that were done at Valley Middle School of STEM and Apple Valley High School from the 2015 referendum, and pointed out that schools throughout the district would receive improvements from the recommendations as currently presented. The high-profile projects are in Rosemount, but additional security cameras, outdoor safety lighting would be added at all schools, for example, along with other improvements for providing a consistent experience. As mentioned above, there were comments supporting improvements to center-based special education space, a district standard for middle school and high school science labs, and additional space for early learning. The last theme I will comment on that surfaced during both the dialogue meetings and in the online input is to include activity centers in the Phase 1 recommendations. Comments were based on lack of space for activities compared to communities we compete against, and to provide an additional community asset. In the proposed facilities master plan presented to the board, an activity center at each of the 4 comprehensive high schools is included in Phase 2 as part of a future bond referendum. Bring back fieldhouse consideration for this referendum, one recorder noted. I like the idea of public use of facilities and potential field houses and other roads. Field houses now. The administration will continue to consider all input we receive before making a final recommendation to the board at the January 9th meeting. That's when final recommendations for facilities will come back. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
Great. With that, are there any questions or comments from the audience? Sure, come on up. Just state your name and where you're from. You don't have to give us your address. And we look forward to hearing your input.
Chairperson Magnuson, Superintendent Krieger, and members of the board. I'm Ron Ryman, and together with my wife Julie, we're 24-year residents of Apple Valley and proud parents of 3 District 196 educated students. As beneficiaries of the school district, we feel strongly about supporting it both for the current and also the future student bodies. The results of the November 2022 survey highlighted the community's strong support and perspective on facility and program needs. And we believe our goal should be the combination of accommodating the growth of the district while continuing to develop our AAA philosophy. The district has made and is considering significant upgrades to facilities, but more needs to be done now. Let's continue to support the AAA philosophy by moving the building of the high school activity centers into Phase 1 of the master facility plan. As I understand it, this adds $96 million to the existing plan's $374 million capital spend, but it would fundamentally change the facilities available to all 4 high schools and give the students a better desired daily experience for those engaged in activities and resolve situations that exist today, such as practices that are occurring later in the evenings when students may or may not be able to attend, getting back and forth from home, and then return to school, and also enable practicing in appropriately designated areas for activities such as dance team, color guard, and gymnastics. Our 3 adult children are successful graduates of the district, and the academic, performing arts, and athletic programs and facilities allowed them to have experiences that were critical in their preparation to further their education at the University of Minnesota, the Naval Academy, and Harvard. Let's accelerate the development of the district facilities by making the capital investments now in order to enable District 196 to remain the exceptional school district that it is today. Like nearly 80% of the survey respondents, Julie and I both think that this is an investment worth paying for. Thanks.
Good evening.
Good evening, and thank you, Chairman Magnuson, members of the board, Superintendent Krieger, and fellow citizens. Good evening. Thanks for the time and opportunity to speak on behalf of the bond referendum being considered by District 196. My name is Jess Smith. I'm the outgoing president of Eastview Athletic Association. I was flanked by our incoming president, Jason Petty, and he and his son had to take off to basketball practice, so I will just mention him. Eastview Athletic Association is a not-for-profit youth athletic association that was started in 1998. Since then, our mission has been to provide safe, accessible, and fun athletic experiences to our community of youth, regardless of their age and level of play. Today, we host more than 20 programs offered across 12 sports, serving between 3,500 and 4,500 registrants a year. We tally that to somewhere between 1,500 and 2,500 households that are connected to us each year. This year, we celebrated an amazing milestone with more than $400,000 given back through financial aid and college scholarships for graduating seniors since we started in '98. More than 90% of our registrations come from Apple Valley, Rosemount, and Eagan school areas. The school district is an important partner to EVAA and our largest source for space, making up more than half of all the indoor and outdoor facilities we utilize in 12 months. Like the school district, we're going through growth, and we have actually exceeded growth, and we are now beyond our pre-COVID numbers. To date, we've managed to support growth with investments made into private facilities, but we're quickly reaching capacity, particularly for our indoor programs. Looking forward, the cost to play in these facilities will be increasing. As a board, we're doing what we can to address these trends without passing the burden on to the family, but we need help. First, we would like to express our support for this referendum and reinforce the need for safe, accessible school facilities. Second, and if the opportunity exists, we would like to ask the school board to consider pulling forward the high school athletic centers as part of the initiative. Whether it be brand new space for athletic facilities or brand new space otherwise, we recognize the need for space, and we're willing to share, be part in that journey. EVA is open to any questions or needs from this group. We're happy to help with everything from gathering insights to helping drive a Vote Yes campaign next year. Thank you again for your partnership and listening to this request. We stand by ready to support.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Todd Frickstead. I'm an Eagan resident. I've been on the board for the traveling basketball program. I'm currently we have a booster club at the ECU High School for the basketball program. So thank you for allowing me to come and talk to you tonight. So I'm a proud parent of 3 ECU students, 2 of which graduated in 2021. My son is currently a sophomore at the high school. So I'm here tonight to just talk about the impact athletics has had on our family and our kids, and how the lack of activities, gym space has impacted the community and our family. So one of my daughters played volleyball and my son plays basketball. So I think I've been in every facility in the state. The facilities, District 196, are not close to the majority of towns that we're in. Surrounding communities, Burnsville, Cottage Grove, Bloomington, to name a few. We consistently, as a traveling basketball parent, had to travel to Bloomington and Burnsville for a lot of our practices. We were in this gym many times, but as an 8th grade student, practicing here was just really not sufficient. So lack of gyms has really impacted the ability for our in-season teams at the high school level also. My son's currently on the varsity basketball team, and they've had some practices not being able to practices because of sharing facilities with other programs. Other programs are obviously great. It was great to see that United program here tonight.
Mm-hmm.
I hear that I go to school quite a bit, and you see the dance teams, the cheerleading teams, the unified. They're practicing in common areas. They don't really have the space needed for it. So kind of sum it up, it's kind of a lost opportunity. One other thing. Being with the traveling program, with the high school program, we don't have the ability to fundraise as we should. We have to support a lot of the programs. We don't have the ability to host large events, host tournaments, those types of things, just because our facilities aren't large enough to host those things. So there's a big impact for our programs for that. So we have to go to Burnsville, Bloomington.
Okay.
So we're hosting an ECU event in different cities. So it's kind of weird, but. To sum it up, passionate about this community, passionate about sports, as you can probably tell. The impact that athletics has had on me personally and on my kids, I think is, it's hard to put a value and a number on it. So anyway, I do support all the things you're talking about. I just think that activities centers would be great for the community. I'd like to see it move up to phase 1. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? Board questions or comments? Tony, tell me a little bit more about athletic facilities. I understand teams practicing after school, but also there's a big need in our buildings for kids to use those during the day for classroom spaces, as far as gym spaces, dance spaces, as far as part of our curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely. As part of the curricular program as well, that was I think even referenced, one of the gentlemen referenced that,
Yep.
that is going on. So it is any number of uses. We haven't had the activity center, we use the word activity centers as opposed to field houses.
Right.
People will use them interchangeably, but we haven't really had that conversation here. But I think it's one that has risen to the surface, and we had it as part of the process, and through this input process, it just has risen as something that people would like to see go forward. And partly, I think, is there was that concern. The presentation isn't up there now, but it's concern about the focus on one area of the district, and what about other areas, what would be in it for other parts of the district. This would be something that every community could have as an asset, and I think that's what communities experience, is that if they are successful in passing these, or if they have another way to finance it and build it, is that it truly does become a valued community asset that is good during the day for the curricular programs, and after for the community as well.
Good, thank you. Any other questions? Bianca?
Got questions.
Thank you.
So the activity centers, I think I heard one of the community members say was 96 million, but I believe the number we were shared with was 125 million. So it's a little difference in cost there. And the overall for the wants in the priority ones was 347 million. Is that correct? 374 million?
And you're correct, and I didn't, and the gentleman who cited the $94 million figure was not incorrect. There was a figure like that out at one point that people may have seen. The difference is that when under code now in Minnesota, if you put an addition onto a school building, you need to have a storm shelter capable of withstanding a F4 tornado. So that being factored into, if we were to put those additions, the activity centers at each of the high schools, that would be a cost that we would have to incur as part of that, and that's the difference between those numbers.
And it's unfortunate because I've seen it and I wish I could remember more, but there was a phase 2 and activity centers was on there, but the Leatherman and Morris study, I think, had those ranked like the second to the bottom in their phone study. And so what is that, I don't want to say jumping ahead of, but by moving that from priority 2 to priority 1, what items in that were dismissed?
Yeah, I don't know that there were any items. I'm trying to think. I know that we tested not all, but some of the main components of the recommendations that were being considered. A new Rosemount Middle School, completing renovation of Rosemount High School, and then repurposing Rosemount Middle School with a new middle school, and also the activity centers. The lowest of those, all of them had over 60% support. The lowest was 61% support. So that's what Peter said, number one, is you have a majority support to begin with for all of these, and here's what the numbers are. The lowest was a new middle school, and it was Rosemount Middle School was 61%, and I'm not positive what was next to that, but I'll take your word for that.
It was
that
like
may have been
68%. So I'm not opposed to activity centers, but I've been on the Budget Advisory Council now for a while, and these haven't been, so it feels kind of new to me as a new idea, and I'm sure it's been on the radar for a long time. But we also talk about, we have 286 kids waiting to get into our early childhood programs. We've got kids that can't get into our after-school programs because we don't have enough space. So will these activity centers, how will they be used for the public? Because I've heard that these are for the public, or that it'll be a public space. How will they support after-school programming for kids? Or are these spaces being built more to be used by the athletic associations? I mean, that's who's come here tonight. I'm just curious.
I don't know that that decision's been made yet. But it would be something that would be, there would certainly be a community component to it. And I think there would be enough for lots of users to have a piece of that use. What they're talking about in terms of size is a 4-station. So you could have 4 courts, different surfaces. So you could do a basketball, you could do, more of a field sport in another station area. But no, in terms of how it would be, how all the details would work out, no, that would have to be settled. But certainly, as with and the ADs could certainly speak to the turf, but that's become a community asset now that has use beyond the school day, beyond for just our students, but for athletic associations as well, and other people.
And then last question, adding the 125 million onto that, what does that put the average tax homeowner be? What would that be? Because right now it's 10, is that 14, is it 16?
Well, I think it would certainly make a difference if we're doing phase 1 or phase 2. Or question.
Right. So I'm asking if all, so the option is you do it all as one, or we separate it out into 2 questions, right?
Yes, and these are all things that we'll be discussing as an administration, and perhaps with you even before we come back to the meeting on the 9th, and we may schedule a special meeting to have that very conversation to say, is this something you want to consider? If you were to consider it, do you want it to go forward all as one? Would you separate it out as 2 questions? So yeah, there's certainly room for conversation there. And I'll let Mark maybe speak to the tax impact piece.
So that's a really good question that I've been working on the last week or so. So without getting into the gory details about financing and so forth, the first phase would be about $11, which we've been telling people. $11.50 is the actual number, $11.50. It's not proportional, so field houses would add another $7 to that. And as Tony stated, we could do it in 1 question, we could do it in 2 questions. Those are things that we're working through right now. We plan on having a board workshop so we can get the board's input on that. Or is the decision we don't move forward with it at this point. That's always an option too. But in terms of the tax impact, so if you took both questions together, it'd be about $19 a month.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Good enough. Any other questions or comments from board members? We will continue on to the discussions and all the things that wrap around this before we make a decision.
Yeah, it's a big, thank you for the time. It is a big process that's been going on for over a year and a half.
Right.
To people, about, there's a question earlier tonight about, knowing about things, and that's about being an engaged citizen too, and staying informed about what's going on, and we'll provide information as we have along the way. And you as a board, you've had several meetings on this along the way, and things have changed along the way. And here we stand again talking about another potential change, but that's fine. That's all right. I think that's all part of the process.
And you plan to come back here on January 9th?
It won't be me, but I think it'll be the superintendent and Mark. Yes.
Well, it could be you too. Thank you for the input, and thank you to all the people who participated in the roundtables, in giving us feedback online. All of that goes into, as Tony said, working through this and what are we finding is floating to the top and what do people want. So thank you so much for talking to us tonight, bringing your concerns. We move on to items of old business this evening, and we have Kaya Bruce with the Connections preschool fees for 2023-24.
It's that year again, right?
Geez, easy for me to say.
Good evening, Chairperson Magnuson, members of the board, and Superintendent Krieger. I'm sharing with you tonight the second reading of the proposed Connections preschool fee increases for the 23-24 school year. These proposed fees are based on federal poverty guidelines and utilizes a sliding fee scale correlating to family income and size. The fees also reflect a 2.5% increase from the current year. This is the second reading, so I kindly request your approval tonight, but I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, before we ask for comments from the audience, I'll ask for a motion and a second from the board.
Motion?
Second.
A motion by Bianca, a second by Corey. Any questions or comments on this item from the public? Questions, comments from board members? Pretty straightforward. We looked at it last time. The sliding fee is always a good thing, and it mimics federal law. So we have a motion by Bianca, a second by Corey to approve the Connections preschool fees for 2023-24. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. That passes on a 5-0 vote. Thank you so much. Next up tonight is one of our favorite items on school boards is the middle school and high school course revision. We had a good conversation about this last time. The course revisions for 22, 23, and 22, 24. And Steve Trone is up here.
One of the most popular agenda items.
No, one of them, exactly.
Very good. So, good evening, Chairperson Magnuson, members of the board, and Superintendent Krieger. I did have the opportunity to be present at the November 14th school board meeting and present in detail an overview and a summary of not only the process we use for course revisions each year, but also details on and highlighted some of the course revisions being proposed. And as you know, they're prepared annually at each middle school and high school, and teacher leaders and department chairs and principals all go through a process, and we pull together as a group of principals with the Director of Secondary Ed and myself as Director of Teaching and Learning, and go through that process to determine which courses are recommended to be proposed as new courses or revised or replicated or restructured courses. So you have that detailed packet once again in your board documents for this evening. And I'm here tonight presenting it under old business, asking for your approval, but also happy to answer any related questions that you have at this time.
With that, this is an action item this evening, so I'll ask for a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second?
Motion by Sachin, a second by Bianca. Are there any questions or comments from the audience? Question, comments from board members?
I have a quick
Yeah.
comment. One of the questions I asked last time was how do families find out about these things? And some of us had an incredible visit to Apple Valley High School. And in that meeting, not only was I blown away, but I was overjoyed to understand the amount of compassion, system structure, and thoughtfulness that the administrators make over there to make sure that students know their options, recruit them into the options, and promote the use of those as well. So it's great to see that we have good options and then a way to connect these to the students as well. And I'm just so incredibly touched by all the work the Principal Monson's team is doing over there. And so it's a wonderful way to see an end-to-end solution come to life in this way. So I just want to share that as well.
It's great to point that out. I've heard about that process as well, the efforts being made at Apple Valley High School and other schools in that regard to be proactive and intentional, encouraging students to register for specific courses. And on a larger scale, in terms of timeline, I mentioned this last time as well when I was here, that once approved, each high school then publicizes and promotes these courses in the registration materials, which starts before winter break in December and then proceeds into January. So.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you again for bringing these to us. We have a motion by Sachin and a second by Bianca to approve the middle school and high school course revisions for the years 2023-24. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. That passes on a 5-0 vote.
Thank you for your support.
Next up this evening, under items of old business, is the 2022 payable 2023 property tax levy limitations. We get Mark Stotts up here again, and he'll walk us through the property tax levy limitations.
Okay, so there's not much walking through here. We heard most of it during the Truth in Taxation hearing, so I'll keep this really brief. We're asking for the board to approve the final levy or certify the final levy at $133,519,389.97 as presented in the Truth in Taxation hearing. And it represents about a $8.7 million increase or 7.02% compared to taxes payable in 2022. So with that, I'd recommend approval and entertain any questions you might
Perfect.
have.
This is an action item this evening, so before we move on, I'll ask for a motion in a second.
So moved?
Second?
Motion by Corey and a second by Sachin. Any questions or comments from people in the audience? Questions and comments from board members? We went through this quite thoroughly earlier in the meeting, so I think we're all set. We've got the motion and a second to approve the payable 22-23 property tax levy limitations as outlined. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. That passes on a 5-0 vote.
Thank you.
I think you're done now.
Am I?
I think so.
I gotta watch Christopher.
Oh,
so-
wow. Next up, in items of new business this evening is the final budget for fiscal year 2022-23, and Christopher Anya-Grabshaw is going to walk us through that. Now you can see why sometimes you can see why people are confused of which budget we're working on and how do they know, because it seems like we're always working on budgets. What, last year's budget or next year's budget or this year's budget? So
Yes, we are. Again, thank you, Superintendent Krieger, Chair Magnuson, members of the board, and the public. Christopher Anya-Grabshaw is my name, and I'll be walking us through the FY 22-23 fiscal year. There's a story, but we'll have to wait until later for that piece. So we'll start off as we're looking at the FY fiscal year 22-23. We'll go through our compass, so just to lay the groundwork of the distance we're going to cover. I'll start going over the cycle that we go through, and then I'll touch on the cost. It is a component of the Truth in Taxation hearing that today we do present on the budgets. We'll go through that, and then finally I'll end with a celebration. So a budget cycle, you just approved the start of the 23-24 budget. So this one that we're talking about this year began its journey last December when the school board took action on the 2022 levy. So that's the action that the journey it began. We adopted the preliminary budget in June. That was developed based on information that we had. For the most part, there were estimates. So we're looking at student enrollment. We're estimating FTEs in the buildings, and then contract settlements. Some of them had not taken place yet. So the final budget we're presenting today, we have the October 1 child count. So we know the students who are in our facilities. We know who staff helping those students meet their educational goals. And we know what contract settlements have taken place since the June action was taken. There was no legislative action in the interim, but we do have a rollover of federal dollars that the state has. So once we close out the fiscal year 22, any leftover funds that had been distributed through the state from the federal government, those are rolled over into this current fiscal year, and we've included those adjustments into this budget. The next step on the cycle will be our final budget adjustments, which takes place in the spring. We do take into consideration any grants that we will have received in the interim, and then we conclude the budget cycle with the annual audit. So sometime in the summer, fall, we will be presenting on the FY23 audit. So on this slide, we're looking at the operating fund. So the total revenue that we're anticipating in the general fund, $451 million, against expenditures of $473 million. On the general fund side, when we look at the revenue that's being projected, state aid makes up 70% of the revenue. Proposed taxes, 23% of the 451, and then between the federal aid and local government, it's 4% and 3% respectively. On the expenditure side, in the general fund, we're anticipating expenditures of 473. Of that, if I look at the object area, we're looking at the salaries and benefits make up 83% of that figure. Programmatically looking at that figure again, we look 70% of what we're expending in the general fund goes toward direct student instruction. 13% of that goes toward student support. Buildings, grounds, maintenance accounts for 13% of what's left, and then administration and district support combined for 8%. On the food service side, we're anticipating revenues of $13.2 million against expenditures of $12.5. A change happened as of July 1 on the revenue side for food service. So last year, all the revenue that we got came from the Fed because it was free lunches for all students. What's presented here, we have 6% of aid that's coming in from the state. The federal government pays 41% of that. Anticipated $13 million, and then local fees, which are fees, tuition for students' lunches and staff meals, 53% of the food service revenue. Community Service Fund, $9.5 million anticipated in aid against expenditures of $10 million, and a breakdown on the revenue component for community education. The state chips in 37%, the federal government about 4% of that, and then local, in terms of fees for enrollments, 41%, and then property taxes coming in at 18%. If I go outside of the operating funds and we'll look at the other funds, building construction, we are still spending down the 2016 bond activity. There are some projects that are still being closed out, and that's what's represented here. We're anticipating collecting taxes to meet our debt obligations, so $17 million in revenues for debt service against expenditures for $16 million. Our internal service funds includes our medical and dental self-insurance accounts and our severance. So those three make up the revenues and expenditures in that internal service fund. And then fiduciary funds, other post-employment benefits, is what is accounted for. When I look at overall these funds, the revenues and expenditures that are presented are in alignment with prior years. And then when we look at the trends that are upcoming, again, there is alignment between those. So overall budget summary, we are presenting to the board. We would like your review of this item. We have $559 million we're anticipating in revenues across all funds. Expenditures of $582 million, anticipated fund balance at the end of the year of $158 million. There are celebrations. So in my slide, I said cycle. We have the original. We have cycle, cost, and then celebration. So we've talked about the cost. Now, all these are big dollars, and while I'm an accountant, I enjoy and I play a lot with numbers. I have to say, when I was growing up, I wanted to do something different. So I thought I had a different calling. And like all of us, we start on a certain journey, trajectory, and then something happens and we change course. So I wanted to be a pilot. But then I figured that, I have skills elsewhere, stand-up. And I do stand-up budget presentations like today. I like to take the numbers that we're seeing and bring a story, and it gets a little bit tedious doing that with just numbers. And so then I went out and I went looking for help. I found Cliff Dodge, who helps put up the AV equipment and just helps to share a different kind of a story. Because all these things have meaning, but the meaning is not in what you're proving. The meaning is in what is happening in the classrooms, in the athletic fields. So I hope that you can join me on a little bit of a journey as we go out and explore what we collaborated on with Cliff Dodge. So it takes a village to raise a child. I think it takes a village to tell a good story. And it's these stories that we are here to celebrate. I started saying I wanted to be a pilot, and I have to say one of the things that I think I'm inspired by is there's a student, Cody Anderson, who's a state champion drone pilot. So at least through all this, maybe I have my inspiration for my next gig, because Cody tells me I can fly. So our recommendation tonight is we have, this was the first hearing for the budget. I'll be bringing this back in January. We have produced a booklet. It has additional information. I'm just going to say read it. If you have any questions or anything like that, I would be happy to provide clarification on that.
Christopher, that was awesome. That was our budget that came to life. Thank you, thank you. Made me cry. Any people in the audience, anybody have any questions or comments? Board members, questions or comments?
Wonderful.
Your stand-up gig might be good. Thank you, sir. We have no other action items this evening. We'll go to board members and superintendent updates. Board members with items they'd like to brag about.
Yeah, I was just going to share. So yesterday we heard a little bit about earlier, but yesterday I had the distinct pleasure of taking my whole family to Seussical the Musical at Eastview High School. I highly encourage anyone who's looking for something to do this next weekend to please attend. It was an amazing, our student performers. I think we have just some of the most talented students in our district when I see them put on productions like this. Egan High School is also doing Encore 2022 this weekend.
Awesome.
There's a few more showings left, so like I said, if you're looking for anything to do, I'm sure there's still tickets available. I encourage anyone to check it out.
It was awesome. Any other board members? Superintendent Krieger.
Okay, I just have one quick reminder, and that is that January 5th is the deadline to apply for enrollment in one of our 5 elementary magnet schools for next year. For more information and to apply for enrollment, go to district196.org and select magnet schools under academics. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We've come to the end of our agenda this evening. I'll ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Corey, a second by Joel. All in favor of adjournment indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. We're adjourned. We will see you January 9th.